occurrence of coup d'etats. Ambitious young men, in this case, were affected by those limitations within the army.
You also identified the divide, or rather the divided loyalties, and the political divisions and the ethnic divisions within the army at the time. How did this mix contribute to the organizational factors?
In many, many important ways. It is argued that those in the top brass of the military, because of their rank, their class orientation, in many ways had similar interests with their civilian political counterparts. And it went all the way down, so that those at the bottom, the rank and file, had less in common economically and had a less sympathetic orientation, political orientation, to the elite. What that basically suggests is a deep political divide, so that the divisions in the army replicated the divisions in society.
It is said by some witnesses that the officer corps in the army was a reflection of what you have just said, those political divisions in our society. Cronism, the Banjul Mafia, the Terry Kafo, the Bakari Dabok group, and the Sehu Savali group, all represented in the army, vying for control and authority. Does that reflect, is it a reflection of the findings you have made in your studies of this subject?
Yes, and not only mine. I mean, there have been others too that have come to similar conclusions. John Weissman, Elizabeth Vidler, Ibrahim Assise, and many others have come to similar conclusions. And this is not only true of the Gambia. When you look at coup d'etats in the former Zaire and Ghana, ethnicity and the replication of the conflicts in society in the army itself became quite important.
What impact did this have on civilian control or civilian security for the army?
Well, it really didn't have a positive impact or effect. In fact, many military regimes or armies in West Africa and possibly throughout much of the Third World do not subscribe to the notion or principle of civilian supremacy. In fact, they believe they do better than the civilians when it comes to running these countries, and consequently decide to intervene.
In your report, in paragraph 23, you put it thus: yet the general belief amongst most military organizations in Africa at the time was the army was justified to intervene because of its putative professional qualities of efficiency and professionalism. In fact, many scholars of modernization theory, including Huntington, argued the army was most suited to modernizing a country rather than civilians. I term this the modernizing military view. Was that also a view held by Gambian soldiers, you think?
I believe so. And I think it was also a view held by many Gambians in the population.
So, in paragraph 24, the conclusion you have on this particular issue is quite interesting. Could you kindly read it out, paragraph 24?
24.
Page 11.
Okay. To the contrary, the GNA was for all intents and purposes dysfunctional and lacked the discipline to carry out its national mandate of protecting the nation. In fact, it became complicit and a party to the rivalries and factionalism that was rife in society. Jammeh and his coup conspirators, aware of these anomalies in the GNA, believed a coup could be successfully executed. Thus, a combination of personal grievances, political ambition, and greed, alongside organizational, institutional failures, were important contributory factors in the 1994 coup d'etat.
Good. So now we can move on to the societal and environmental factors that you identified. Let's discuss now the societal and environmental factors you identified.
Yes. One of the important things in looking at the 1994 coup, as in coups in other parts of the world, is to look at society as an entity. How is society organized? What are the important groups? How is prestige and how are, more importantly, resources distributed? Who gets what and who doesn't, and why? What are the class divisions, the ethnic, racial in some cases, religious, in fact, regional differences too? All this come to play when coup d'etats are analyzed at the environmental societal level. What is also clear at this level of analysis is the fact that these societies are in transition for the most part, and over time breed deprivation, discontent, that in fact are very important in contributing to coup d'etats within those societies. So it is an important level to look at. I said lens, or provides another lens through which to analyze coup d'etats.
You mentioned certain groups in your report.
Yes.
As a reflection of some of these problems you identified.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the Ken Street Vu, for instance, and the Terry Kafo. What is the role played by groups of this nature in this important debate?
They played a very important role insofar as they were sometimes hotbeds of contention. Many of them were young intellectuals, maybe at the sixth form. Some had just graduated from university. Others were in the civil service. They were part of the evolving elite. They provided the ideological fodder for discussion. Some of them had been trained in African universities, others in Western universities. So they came back with a lot of ideas about change. They were disgruntled, for some of them, about the pace of change and development in the country. They were also imbued by ideas of Pan-Africanism. You remember Stokely Carmichael and many others did visit the country, among others. The ideas of Nkrumah also played a major role in sensitizing and raising the political awareness of Gambians during that time. What I'm saying is, it created a very fertile ground for discussion as well as questioning the very basis of political legitimacy of the government in place. And over time, I think their ideas began to have effect and permeated much of society, influencing the young ones as well.
Thank you, thank you. Take a look at paragraph 28 of the report. Perhaps maybe you should read it out.
Okay. By the time of the 1994 coup d'etat, Gambia had transformed into a deeply divided social and economic formation. And it also became apparent that the PPP and Jawara overstayed their welcome in power, which added another critical dimension to the growing expectation that elections alone could not and would not dislodge the government. And the 1992 presidential elections made this perception all the more evident and was used as fodder to fuel this widely shared sentiment. And as noted earlier, charges of endemic corruption, inflated travel reports, and per diems increased popular discontent and distrust in government and resulted in declining legitimacy for the government and the PPP itself. Internal factionalism and growing distrust among its members, especially after Jawara's announcement and failure to select a successor at Mansa Kanka, nursed perceptions of a power vacuum, with growing expectation that the army needed to step in and avert further decline of the economy and the polity. In sum, these societal, environmental factors greatly contributed to the coup d'etat.
You also went on to identify sub-regional factors.
Yes.
Could you take us through them very quickly?
Yes. The 80s were very turbulent times. The entire subcontinent, and especially the West African sub-region, was engulfed in conflict, be it in Liberia, Sierra Leone. Many of the countries were also led by military regimes. So when it came to democracy and democratization, there was a very significant deficit. Except for the Gambia, where there was some semblance of democracy and stability. And Gambia was very much invested, and South Africa was, in restoring peace and order in this very volatile sub-region. Gambians served in Liberia, ECOMOG, among others. But this was to have a contagion effect, I suggest. By that I mean the instability that engulfed Gambia began to have a knock-on effect, began to seep in to the country itself. And over time, that too contributed to the coup d'etat of 1994. I don't believe this is the most important factor. Some would say this is the dependent variable, but it nonetheless contributed in some degree to the coup because South Africa became increasingly more invested in resolving the conflicts in the subcontinent.
How about the service by Gambian forces in Liberia as part of ECOMOG troops to help deal with the peace and security problems in Liberia? How did that affect Gambia?
It affected Gambia insofar as many of them coming back and the failure of government to pay them their salaries or their per diems created frustration, leading to several demonstrations against the government at State House. Many of them also felt that the government was not very receptive to their demands. I believe over time this was to create deep resentment against the government. And these combined with societal factors, internal military conditions, personal ambition, all culminating to cause the coup d'etat.
And how about the effect of the wars that were being fought in Liberia and Sierra Leone at the time, and their effect on Gambia, for instance, the influx of refugees and so forth? Has that had any effect on the situation?
Gambia, being a very small country and an economy that was teetering on collapse, was further burdened by the influx of these refugees. While there was some international help, I don't believe it went far enough in curbing the problem. And it created some kind of societal instability. The refugees could not be easily absorbed, and economic resources, as a result, were severely strained. And I think this also added to the perception that the government wasn't doing enough. And I think this also contributed indirectly to the coup d'etat.
Thank you very much. I'll now move on to the second pre-assigned question.
Yes.
Which is, what were the circumstances and factors that enabled the gradual erosion of human rights and democratic norms, and ultimately led to the creation, consolidation, and sustenance of the Jammeh dictatorial regime? And you have that addressed in page 14 of the report onwards.
Yes. Jammeh and his cohort, the FPRC, engineered the process, the electoral process, in such a way as to make it favorable to themselves. They created an independent electoral commission that they appointed themselves, or Jammeh appointed himself. And after that, a constitution was quickly drafted and passed with very favorable terms for Jammeh himself. The age limit, the term limits were all expunged from the constitution. In addition to that, Decree 45 gave Jammeh